Beijing?
Oh, well, it's like parents say about their children. I love them all equally. I don't have a favorite. And it sounds like dodge, but it's true. Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Pacific, uh, China, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, they're all so different. It's fascinating, and it's one of the things that makes it so exciting as a diplomat to engage and be responsible for East Asia and the Pacific. And in terms of food, hey, I love to eat and I don't mind drinking either. So I guess the list starts with what xiaolongbao and keeps going on from sushi to bibimbap to kare and satay and green papaya salad. So there's just no limit to the interesting, exciting, and important places, cultures, and cuisines that the Asia region has to offer.
Right, you are a gourmet.
I'm a glutton, not a gourmet.
All right, and I cannot actually recall anyone like you who ever served in the both highest position in turn regarding Asia in the White House and also the State Department. So how do you see your prominent role in the Obama administration, and how do you compare these two jobs as Assistant Secretary and NSC Senior Director?
Well, I mean, the most important thing to bear in mind is that it's not that I had a prominent role, it's that I had a supporting role. And I supported President Obama. I supported the National Security Advisor, the Secretaries of State, and the rest of the cabinet. Moreover, I was supported by a phenomenal team, not only my colleagues, but the folks who worked with me or under me in the Asia Bureau when I moved over to State. So it sounds like a cliche, but it really has always been very much a team effort. There are real differences in the jobs, being the special assistant to the president, the senior advisor in the NSC, and then the assistant secretary of state, even though the area of responsibility and the issues were the same. I had a big head start, an advantage, when I became Assistant Secretary of State for that very reason, because I was very familiar with the issues, and equally or more importantly, because I was very familiar with the players, both within the U.S. government, in the Asia-Pacific region. I knew folks, they knew me, but also elsewhere in the academic world, in the political world, in Congress, etc. So it made it somewhat easier for me. They're very different jobs, though. For 4 years working for President Obama in the NSC, I'm not sure I saw the sunshine during the day very often. Uh, it's a tough job spent mostly behind closed doors, working as a staffer in support of the president, the vice president, and other key officials. A lot of the work in the NSC is a matter of coordinating and ensuring that the different agencies of government, as they deal with issues in or related to the Asia-Pacific region, were coordinated, that people understood what the goal and the strategy was, that we weren't surprising each other or working at cross purposes. When I moved over to the State Department as Assistant Secretary, uh, things changed significantly in that I was back in the business of diplomacy. Most of my time was spent engaging foreign counterparts directly on the road, meeting with vice foreign ministers and ambassadors and press and academics and so on, and explaining, persuading, sometimes arguing, sometimes defending. It was a much more public role, and the Assistant Secretary of State in most administrations is expected to be a policy leader and a policy driver. And I had the good fortune of working for John Kerry when he was the secretary, and he is a leader who gave his assistant secretaries a lot of room to maneuver, a lot of authority to set policy and to drive it.
Right. So you are the only one who has ever served in both highest position for Asia affairs.
No, there are other people if you go back in
Like a long
time.
time ago. But recent history, there's probably you're the only one.
Well, in maybe the last 20 years, a friend and colleague of mine, Stanley Roth, in the Clinton administration, I think also made the same transition.
Okay. Now let's talk about, we know that since you serve in Obama administration for 8 years, we know you are one of the major architects of the rebalance policy. Do you see it's a successful policy?
Well, look, it's a diplomatic strategy, and like all diplomatic strategies, it's perpetually a work in progress. Now, when you look at the snapshot in time of what the situation was in the end of 2008 or in the beginning of 2009 when the Obama administration came into office, and what the situation looked like 8 years later, it's very clear that America was faced with a devastating financial crisis that had negative and serious impact on the Asia-Pacific region and the rest of the world. So President Obama's first and top priority coming into office was to try to get the U.S. economy back on track. It was also the case that there were very serious strains in America's relationship with some of its close partners, and as a result of the extended Iraq war and the global war on terror, many Asian countries and many Asian friends felt that the U.S. had neglected, even turned their back on the region. When you compare that with the situation in 2016 and 2017 as the Obama administration wrapped up, you can see that it's very different. Confidence in the United States had risen dramatically. The bilateral alliances the U.S. enjoys in the region were very strong, in very good shape. The negotiations for a multilateral trade agreement, the TPP, had been successfully concluded. And U.S.-China relations were on a very solid, stable footing with a strong foundation that allowed us to, on the one hand, create significant areas of cooperation and progress, whether it was on climate change or whether it was on global health and the Ebola crisis, or development in Africa, or even the important agreement that the U.S. and China reached on cyber issues. We had considerable success in demonstrating meaningful cooperation. At the same time, we were able to tackle areas of real disagreement and deal with problem areas. In a few cases, we found solutions. In other cases, we reduced the scale and the temperature. And in some cases, we just found ways to manage our differences. So I think, by and large, my answer is yes. The rebalance strategy of engaging in Asia, of joining the East Asia Summit, of strengthening our partnerships, alliances, of investing heavily in the bilateral relationship with China, as well as supporting and working with emerging powers, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. I think the short answer is yes, that was a successful strategy, and it's not over.
Yeah, but we know Trump administration now they propose this Indo-Pacific uh, policy. Is it? How do you see this policy? Is that a geographical idea or something more than that?
I don't think we have the answer to that question yet. There are a lot of directions that this could evolve towards. There's a great deal of discussion going on within the administration and around the administration about what does a free and open Indo-Pacific strategy comprise, what is it comprised of, what does it look like, what does it do, how does it differ. I don't know the answer, and it may be that the administration itself hasn't reached that many conclusions, but I'm not sure that starting with the label, starting with the bumper sticker, is necessarily going to provide the answers. Different countries and different people have used the phrase Indo-Pacific in the past. In the case of the U.S. military, they talk in our headquarters in Honolulu about the Indo-Pacific as a region, and that's very literally the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, which is the area of responsibility of the U.S. Pacific Command. Australia, which is geographically right on the dividing line between the two oceans, historically has talked about the Indo-Pacific. And the Prime Minister of Japan, in connection with the arc of democracy and so on, has used that phrase too. Everyone has meant something a little bit different by it. I think the thing to watch is how the behavior and the policies that underlie the behavior of the U.S. under President Trump evolves. And in many respects, what we're seeing now, with a few notable exceptions like TPP, looks very similar to the Obama-era rebalance to Asia. And there's a good reason for it, because fundamentally, we'll always see that U.S. strategy and U.S. policies reflect U.S. interests. And the U.S. has a huge vested interest in both the stability and security on the one hand, but also the growth and the prosperity on the other hand of the Asia-Pacific region or the Indo-Pacific region.
And you just mentioned about TPP. How do you think about the withdrawal of President Trump's decision from TPP?
Well, I think it was a disappointment to all of the people involved in Asia policy, not only Democrats but Republicans as well. I think that what we have seen is the emergence of the so-called TPP 11, where the 11 countries have not only decided to try to keep the agreement intact in more or less its form, but more importantly have decided to take it forward, and even without the United States to pursue the high standards that were embodied in the original agreement. What that means is that there is a trade bloc in formation with these high standards and these low tariffs that doesn't include the United States. And it's hard for me to see how that can be a good thing. We haven't yet seen countries respond to the suggestion by President Trump that they engage in bilateral free trade negotiations with the United States. The administration is still very much focused on making adjustments or renegotiating the NAFTA agreement, which was something that I think they had envisaged doing in the first few months in office. And so there is perhaps some significant lost opportunities in terms of the withdrawal of the U.S. from TPP, but we'll have to see.
Right. And now let's turn to China.
Mhm.
In dealing with China, which event or people that impress you the most?
Well, I mean, I've been impressed by the high quality of Chinese diplomats, of Chinese scholars, Chinese business people. I've made many friends, and look, they're in a country of nearly 1.4 billion people. It shouldn't come as a surprise that there are some extraordinarily capable and extraordinarily smart and impressive people, and many of them have made it into important positions. There's really a handful of Chinese diplomats with whom I've worked very, very closely and had practical successes, practical accomplishments in problem solving. And these are people who I'll always consider friends and esteemed colleagues. In terms of events, I think among the most memorable and impactful event in China for me may have been a dinner, a very small dinner, between then Vice President Xi Jinping and then Vice President Joe Biden in Chengdu in 2012, I think, during the Vice President's visit to China. They had spent several days traveling, first in Beijing and then to Chengdu. They'd gotten to know each other, and Vice President Biden certainly is a very charismatic and very charming guy. He had a good relationship, I think, with then Vice President Xi Jinping. And so towards the end of this multi-day visit, in a very small, nice restaurant in Chengdu, they had a relaxed and intimate conversation in which they were really able to talk in a way that felt to me to be very honest, very authentic about what their hopes for their own nation were, what their concerns were, how they saw the world. And it was not the conventional discussion between politicians or between diplomats with talking points and carefully scripted formulas and so on. It was a genuine exchange, and it made me feel like there was extremely valuable conversation underway between senior American and senior Chinese leaders, and it made me hopeful for the prospects for U.S.-China relations.
Right now.